Hey Tyler, how are you doing today? Hope everything is going well. Hey Daniel, it was good. I mean, it was short, but it was nice seeing you there and nice seeing a few kids anyway. So yeah, it was all good. Janae, how are you? Amal, nice you could be here. Hope everything is going well for you on this Friday afternoon. Just going to wait a few more minutes here as everyone is starting to log in, I see. Man, it's almost here. 2 weeks from today, it will all be over. So keep that in mind. Hey, Bavesh, Brendan, Jace, how are you guys? Hope everything is all right with you. Miss you guys, that's for sure. Hey, Luke, Tamara, how are you? Nice you could be here. Hey, Mark, how are you? A couple more minutes. We'll start at 2:05. So if you need to go get yourself some water or something to drink, shut off your Netflix, stop playing Fortnite, that sort of thing. Let's concentrate for about another 45 minutes to an hour, and we'll be good. All right, about one more minute based on my clock here, and we'll get going. Hey, Cameron, nice you could make it. You guys, the ones that are in here right now, you guys have always been here. Almost every lecture I've done, you guys have participated or been a part of, and I do really appreciate your focus and your drive and your determination to pass this AP exam here in a couple of weeks. So, Mr. Klaus, what? What are you even talking about, Brendan? So, I don't have any sick beats. That's for sure. All right. Okay, a couple of things before I get started. I just want to make sure that, you guys are all testing out your systems, making sure that you can log into College Board on that link that I sent out a week or so ago, and then I sent out another email today that has the link in it. Make sure you can, or make sure you practice submitting that test, okay? Because I don't want you coming up on test day not knowing how to do this. That's why we're writing all these DBQs, because I want you guys to be fully prepared, so this is not the first time that you're setting up your workspace to write the DBQ. You need to make sure that you have that all ready to go. So then on that Thursday, May 21st at 1 p.m., man, it is the only thing you need to worry about is the writing of the DBQ itself. You're not worried about how to submit it. You're not worried about what your environment looks like. If your little brother or little sister is in the background, making noise, or your dog is around your feet or whatever, you guys need to make sure that stuff is not an issue. You have to, you have to be very proactive and talking to your mom and dad or whoever and saying, hey, I need this 1 hour space that I cannot be bothered in. All right. So you need to start making those plans now. Okay. We all good on that? All right, let's get going. So today we're going to finish up Unit 6. We're going to finish up all of the content that we possibly could see on the AP exam, okay? We started way back in March with Unit 1, and we have worked our way all the way up through Unit 6, up to 1900. Okay, so we've been dealing with industrialism, and we've also been dealing with the idea of imperialism. We already know what imperialism is. It is the economic domination, the political domination of a strong nation onto a weaker nation. And it is all about the idea of getting resources they need and exploiting populations and exploiting natural resources to contribute to their industrialization and to make them very, very powerful. And one of the things that we need to talk about here is the global economic development. How did environmental factors contribute to the global economy between 1750 and 1900. We need to take a look at that. Remember, economics was the driving force behind imperialism. The want and need to make wealth. That's what they wanted to do. And then, of course, the culture diffusion, religion, the language, all of that stuff just comes a part of it. But the main thing about imperialism was economic wealth, all right? Europe was looking into Africa and Asia. The United States was looking into South America, not only to gain resources, but for new markets as well. And colonial people provided the labor for this. Americans didn't provide labor for it. Europeans didn't provide labor for it. It was the people that they took over, the indigenous native peoples of these areas. They built railroads. They built, large telegraph lines, and then, of course, they were paid very low wages here. All right, some technological developments that took place here. Of course, you have railroads. They provide transportation from the interiors to the coastal areas. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about mostly in Africa, because remember, when the Europeans hit the African coasts for slavery purposes, it wasn't the Europeans that went into the interior to get slaves. They made deals with local coastal tribes to go in and get them. And it isn't until this time period where we have the technology to be able to go into these interiors. It lowers the cost of transportation. The Europeans wanted to put a positive spin on this, and there's a little bit of positive to this. I'm not going to say it isn't all, that it's all bad, but they pointed out that, with the introduction of railroads, transportation costs, people can move back and forth across the continent at a much faster and much easier rate than before. And that is all true, okay? But in reality, it served the best interests of the colonizers. The Europeans were saying, hey, this is really good for you, but also it's much better for us as well. You have Cecil Rhodes, the guy who founded the De Beers Mining Company, the De Beers Diamond Company. He wanted to build a railroad from Cairo, Egypt, all the way to Johannesburg, South Africa. Was it ever completed? Absolutely not. But he had the technology to possibly do that, okay? Steamships became much larger in this era, and they could transport cargo overseas in larger quantities, of course, and then at faster rates of speed. In the 1870s, you have the development of refrigeration, and you're kind of going, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, food will last longer on the long trip from the Americas, from Africa, from Asia to Europe, where they need to be refrigerated, meats and vegetables and, fruits and things that are grown. So development of refrigeration is huge here. The telegraph, was invented in 1832. It transforms communications. It makes it much faster. You don't have to wait days for letters. You can send a telegraph and you can almost have it instantaneously, all right? In 1866, as this shows up here in the upper right, you have the transatlantic cable that was laid between the United States and England. So for the first time in world history, you have this communication, this almost instantaneous communication between two different continents. You're not having to wait, weeks, if not months in some cases, to get information. Agricultural products are huge. Cash crops. And when I say cash crops, this is key to imperialism. Cash crops include tea, cotton, sugar, oil palms, rubber, coffee. They are grown for commercial value instead of being used by the people who actually do the farming, okay? There's no reason for them to use sugarcane other than to make sugar, and depending on the large sugar fields, you don't consume a lot of it. Same with coffee and all these others. The European middle class demanded lots of meat at this time. So cattle ranches in South America pop up. Sheep in Australia and New Zealand, begin to supply Europeans with fresh meat. They're exported to Europe in these refrigerated cargo ships. So it all works together. This new technology allows it. We also see guano mining. And when I say guano mining, it's just basically bird poop or bat poop. And on these South Pacific islands, you have large amounts of it, and it's used for fertilizer. And of course, they would send in, indigenous native people to go in and mine it. Europeans aren't going to go in and mine it. It's a dirty job. It's dug by hand by Polynesian and Chinese laborers in South America. And then it's taken to areas where large amounts of cash crops are grown to fertilize their fields. We have, the demand for raw materials is needed here with imperialism. And these raw materials are the things that are processed into manufactured goods and shipped away. Sugar, rubber, cotton. It turns colonies into what we call export economies. Cottons for textiles, for British manufacturing, got 80% of its cotton from the United States. All right. During the Civil War, the cotton supply was cut drastically. England didn't have any new cotton coming in, so they ended up going to India and Egypt to get their cotton. They just switched markets because raw materials were needed. They just could not stop, producing cotton goods at this time. Rubber, comes out of the Congo. It's for tires and gaskets and hoses and shoes, etc., etc., etc. Sorry about my phone ringing here in the house. And of course, this comes from Central Africa and the Congo, and we know the types of atrocities that have occurred in, Central Africa for the want and the need for, rubber. And of course, the amount of rubber that was needed across the world was not in the Congo was not enough. So we start to see thousands of acres of land in Southeast Asia being cleared to make room for, rubber plantations. Palm oil. I brought that up earlier, and people are going, what is palm oil? Well, palm oil is basically just an oil, and it is used for lubrications for European factories. It's used in candle making. Some African cultures before imperialism actually used palm oil as a currency. So it has been a well-valued commodity for, hundreds of years, even before imperialism. It's an important cash crop from Africa and Southeast Asia. You have ivory, copper, and tin and gold all gathered, from Africa, from several different places, and they use ivory for piano keys. And, ivory comes from the tusks of elephants. So we need to kill a lot of animals to get these resources here. Ivory is also used for billiard balls to play pool. Copper is mined for telegraph lines. Tin is mined for cans to hold food. Diamonds in Africa, founded by the De Beers Diamond Company, which was founded by, Cecil Rhodes. 90% of the world's production of diamonds at this time came out of his mines in Africa. And eventually, Cecil Rhodes would become the prime minister of Cape Colony, which is in South Africa. And his racist policies were the ones that set up segregation that plagued South Africa well into the 20th century. So a lot of these things that, we're talking about has huge repercussions and still do to this day. So what are some of the consequences to this? Well, European populations are going to explode. Not European, urban populations are going to explode. The demand for food was increasingly met by imports, possible by large cargo ships, faster trains, refrigeration. And as industrial nations grew wealthier, stock exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange, developed, allowing more people to invest in capital, allowing them to become wealthy or, lose everything they have if the business venture didn't work. So we also have consequences of commercial extraction. The use of land for one crop leads to monocultures in developing countries. All they do is grow sugar. All they do is grow palm oil. And that's very devastating because you have no biodiversity here. Large areas were cleared to make room for farming, all right? And of course, like I said, it takes a toll on biodiversity here. Crops deplete the fertility of soil. Crop disease, pests spread more easily and more rapidly. And today, many of the former colonies still struggle because of this monoculture and the badly damaged cropland. We're just starting to see them, being able to fix themselves over time. But we still see areas of the world that still struggle. And as a result, many of these areas still need basic agricultural products to feed their people. All right, so that ends up our global economic development. We're going to move into 6.5 here. So I'm just going to give you kind of a few moments to reload, and then we'll get going. Palm oil soup is a traditional Liberian dish. That's interesting, Arjane. I would like to try that maybe. That sounds kind of interesting. I knew you could use palm oil for foodstuffs, but not as a soup or anything on that nature. That's interesting. Thank you. Okay, let me reset up my phone for my notes, and we will get moving on here. No, this is called economic imperialism. Bhavesh, you have no idea what sounds awful. All right, don't knock it till you try it. All right. I tried dabat in Nepal, and I didn't knock it. I ate it for a couple of weeks, and then I couldn't stomach it anymore. All right, so I tried it. It's okay, but it's not something I would eat every day. All right. It looks delicious. Do we have a picture of it or something, Daniel, that we can see this? I don't know. All right, guys, let's get going. I don't want to keep you, too long this afternoon. I know we got things to do. I know some of you might even have AP tests that you have to get ready for next week. So again, I'm just going to, get going here. All right. So let's take a look at economic imperialism. What economic factors contributed to the imperialism in the global economy? And you guys know a lot of this stuff already. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but let's take a look at it. Great Britain, cotton from India and Egypt. They're made in the textiles in the British factories. India now supplies the only, resource. Another raw material that Great Britain needed, of course, was poppies for opium production, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit. Economic imperialism is the idea that foreign business interests take advantage of natural resources beyond their borders. That is what economic imperialism is. So we're going to break it down, and we're going to take a look at, different areas of the world. All right. So economic imperialism in Asia, and primarily we're going to be taking a look at two areas of the world. We're going to take a look at India, and we're going to be taking a look at China. So let's look at China here first. China wasn't interested in, British goods. So this makes a huge trade imbalance here. And China has a lot of silver here because Great Britain had been buying tea from China for years, and the Chinese only accepted silver for that tea. So British silver reserves were becoming really, really low. So in order to get that silver back, the British East India Company had to come up with another idea here. So they began growing poppies in South Asia, in India. And then the Brits took it, they manufactured it into opium, and then sold it to the Chinese for silver, of course. And then the company used the profits from the silver to buy tea from China, and then eventually they were able to buy or grow their own tea in India. And during this time, the Chinese emperor had banned the sale and the use of opium in 1729, but it had very little effect here. The impact eventually was that, it was over half the population in China would become addicted to opium. They could only buy opium with silver. And of course, the British East India Company wanted to keep this trade going because it was so profitable for them. So by 1839, you have the Opium War begin between the British East India Company and China. All right. And then, of course, during this war, China could not withstand the technology that the British had when it comes to making war. And the balance of power had shifted. The Europeans were, the big dogs on the block now. And then after, the war happened, you get the Treaty of Nanking, you get these unequal treaties that are signed by the Chinese because they really couldn't do anything about it. And the treaty required the Chinese to open up more ports to trade to foreigners. You get the island of Hong Kong becomes a British territory. They had to pay damages in excess of $3 million, something on that order. So eventually more trade routes were opened for Europeans to benefit from. And then, of course, when you have more trade routes, guess what happens? You have Christian missionaries coming in, begin to push their influence into China. And then you have the spheres of influence. And you guys all know what the spheres of influence, where foreign nations come in and they kind of carve out different areas of China. It says, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, that type of thing. They gain control for China for economic purposes. Let's take a look at, Africa. After colonization, land that had been devoted to farming in Africa, for centuries was now converted to cash crops. And we know that cash crop production does nothing to benefit your food intake, okay? What you're farming does not really benefit you a whole lot, but it's made to export. It's made for sale, all right? And this is just kind of different areas of, Africa that, what did they produce? Oil, gas, coal, copper, bauxite, gold, diamond, timber, uranium, chromium, different things that the Europeans wanted here. And this unequal trade structure makes the colonies economically dependent on the larger foreign powers. Once you become a colony, once you become an export economy colony, you become so dependent on your colonizer that it's very, very hard to break free. And we see that in Africa. We see that in Asia. And this is going to be a problem all the way up through the 20th century. Latin America and Africa still have some problems because of those dependent economies from the late 19th century and early 20th century here. And of course, when you're so dependent on cash crop economy, it's going to lead to food shortages. So you see a lot of famine, you see a lot of death because of that. Some areas of Egypt or some areas of Africa, you have cotton and cocoa, gold, and then of course you have the African slave trade as well, coming off the west coast of Africa here. All right, so the Europeans, they invest over $10 billion in Latin America. I really couldn't find a good map of Latin American natural resources, but here it is primarily what it looks like. The British in Argentina, they established cattle farming on these, what are known as pampas, these large grass plains, mining in Chile for the Spanish, rubber in Brazil, Central America and the Caribbean. You have the United States heavily involved here. You have a company called the United Fruit Company. And what happens here is that this American company strong arms local governments to maintain policies that are beneficial for the company, for capitalism, to make money. The United States dictates the Monroe Doctrine in 1823 and says, hey, Europe, stay out of our hemisphere. This is ours, okay? We're not coming over there to mess with you. So the United States is beginning to flex its muscle during this time period. American business and sugar plantations, where businesses overthrow a constitutional government in Hawaii to get control of Hawaii, all right? Hawaii had used Enlightenment ideas, Constitution, but here come, the United States and American business and sugar planters saying, hey, this is great land to grow crops on. We want it. So they institute an overthrow of a constitutional government, and therefore it is annexed by the United States in 1898. And then, as we know, Hawaii is, our 50th state. So economic imperialism. Those are some economic factors that contribute to imperialism in the global economy. All right. So let's take a little bit of a break here, and we'll start 6.6. And again, these PowerPoints aren't that long, so that's why we are covering, 4 of them today. All right, and that'll be it. This one here, this PowerPoint, again, is only like 5 slides, so we're good. What am I? Good point, Mr. Klaus. Oh, you've seen it before. No, I've never seen it, Anjane, but I'm looking forward to taking a look at it. So, Bhavesh, do you eat dabat every day? Let me know that. I'm kind of interested. Okay, let's take a look at this one as soon as I get it pulled up here, I guess. Kind of getting behind here on my own. All right, guys, again, make sure that if you haven't, let's write those DBQs. Are we still going to have a DBQ next Monday? Of course we are. And at the end, I'm going to explain what I'm doing with it. Jace, just remind me, I'm doing it a little bit different than what I've done before in the past. I want to kind of give you more of that, what's it going to be like on AP Day feel, okay? So I'll just wait till the very end to do that. Yeah, once a day, sometimes it's just awful. Totally agree. I don't know. I don't know. But then there's probably a food that I would eat here every day. I could probably eat a slice of pizza every day, but just not, no, not dabat. When I was in Nepal, after about 2 weeks of it every day, I'd had enough. So, okay, let's talk about causes of migration in an interconnected world. Okay, and I think you guys pretty much know this information. But it's worth going over one more time. How did environmental and economic factors contribute to patterns of migration? All right. So as industrialized populations, or as industrialization grew, populations moved to urban centers. They moved off the farm. Some left their homelands to migrate to other areas looking for work. Some did it, voluntarily. Others didn't have much of a choice. And we're going to see that here. All across the world, the desire for low-wage labor was linked to the exploitation of natural resources in the system of economic imperialism. You don't want to pay people a whole lot of money because you want to be able to make as much money as possible here. Even though slavery was diminishing in the mid to late 19th century, there was still this need for low-wage laborers. Indian laborers migrated to British colonies in the Caribbean, in South Africa, East Africa, and Fiji because they needed to work on plantations. To this day, outside of India, the largest Indian population in the world resides right here on the northern part of the South American continent because they were taken there or they went there to work on the plantations there. The Chinese migrated to Southeast Asia. They migrated to California to work on the railroad, to work in gold mines there. Japanese laborers went to Hawaii, to Peru, and Cuba. And most of it was indentured servitude. Some stayed, some went home, some made money, sent it back, some called for their wives to come over, some even actually met their wife for the first time. They were mail order brides, and they didn't meet their wife till they got off the boat in whatever area of the world that they were living. And then, of course, you have, the French and British penal colonies in Australia and Africa, and they had to perform very, very hard labor there. And we talked about those penal colonies, the last time. So what were some of the challenges that these immigrants or emigrants, faced? Well, you get what is called a diaspora. And, a diaspora is a movement of any group of people, of one culture from one area of the world to another area of the world. They are moving away from their homeland and they're trying to establish a homeland elsewhere. And, why does this happen? Well, in their homelands, it could be due to discrimination. It could be due to, poverty. It could be due to political conditions and famine. The African slave trade can probably be argued, and rightfully so, as the largest population diaspora ever in history. When you're talking about, 10 million Africans being forced out of Africa to the New World, that is a huge diaspora. And we see little bits of other diasporas, the Jewish diaspora, the Indian diaspora. The Indians were sent to British colonies as indentured servants to replace slaves. The Chinese, large groups moved to California to work on the railroad, the California Gold Rush. Irish moved from Ireland to the United States due to the Great Potato Famine in 1845. It drove as many as 3 million to the United States. So here, you want to make those large connections. And sometimes a DBQ will ask you to do this. And this is perfect where you can connect the Columbian Exchange to imperialism or to migration, because you talk about the potato. It comes from South America. It was taken over to Europe because of its high calorie and very easy to grow, and the Irish become very, very dependent on it. And about 400 years later, they've become so dependent on it, when a blight hits, they don't have any food, and they begin to starve because of it, and it drives them over to the Americas looking for food, looking for work. So the Columbian Exchange and this Irish migration are very, very connected here. So you constantly want to make those types of connections when you write. All right, that adds to that complexity. Large numbers of British citizens went to live in their colonies, okay? It just wasn't workers. Finally, women and children and wives and husbands began to make their way to these areas of the world. And it wasn't due to famine or poverty. They just wanted to be with their family. They just wanted a new adventure. Some were soldiers that stayed. Technical experts went to Africa to help with mining and railroads. Businessmen founded banks in South America, and they stayed. They didn't go back because they were becoming so wealthy, and they liked the climate. They liked where they were living. Japan, tries to set up some of these colonization areas. Some did go to Mexico, Peru, for contract work, but it was a failure for the most part. It didn't, really help, turn out for them. So Japan, wants to get in on this as well, but it doesn't work out as well for them as it does for Europeans here. But nonetheless, many young Japanese men did make their way to the United States to study. All right. And then, of course, we get, discrimination. San Francisco mayor wants Exclusion Act to bar the Japs or the Japanese, saying, you know what, we already have too many Japanese over here. Let's stop them because they are taking our jobs that should be for, white Americans. That's exactly what that means there. Let me see. Almost done with this one. All right. So how are they able to do it? Well, migration happens because of better transportation methods, railroads, large ships. It allows some of these migrant workers to return home to work, to take their money back with them. And a lot of them did that. Others stayed. The Japanese went to Hawaii in 1885 to work on sugar plantations, under 3-year contracts. Some stayed. Some others returned. I remember, a few years ago, I traveled to Hawaii and I rented an Airbnb from a gentleman and his wife who were of Japanese descent. And I asked them, I says, how did you tell me about your family? I'm a history teacher. Tell me about how you got to, the United States because you're of Japanese ancestry. And he said that when his grandfather came over, his grandfather was a part of this, what I just talked about, came over there to work on the sugar plantations. And he didn't meet his wife. His wife was sent from Japan on a boat, and all they did is they got married over the phone. This guy didn't even know who his wife was, didn't even know what she really looked like until she got off the boat in Honolulu, because they just came over and they stayed there. So you see a lot of that. Some return home, some just return money home, others stay, and then of course that is why the United States has such a large, diverse population. All right, so that ends why they moved. And why they stayed. And then we will head into the last one here in just a couple of moments, and we will be done for the day. Let me see. One more. What is it? And this one, 7 slides. So we're good. This is pretty good. There we go. PowerPoint's pulling up on my phone, maybe. Who else has, does anybody have any AP tests next week? know, I don't know if biology or any of those are, next week. If they are, please let me know. I would like to wish you luck on that day. Okay, why is this doing this? All right. Try it one more time here. I was going to say my very last PowerPoint not pulling up, but it's up and ready to go. Okay, let's get going. All right, so here we are. This is the last subtopic of content that I am going to go over. All right, what are the effects of these migrations? All right, how and why did patterns of migration affect society between 1750 and 1900? This is very, very important to understand. Migration in the 19th century was free. When I say free, it was free people going, hey, I want to go here, I want to go there. Some of it was coerced. And no matter if it was free or coerced, it led to long-lasting demographic changes, all right, on the country they went from or they came from, and also on the country of where they went. One of these things you have to remember, initially, most of this migration was men. And of course, when I say men, it's a disproportionate number because of the number of African male slaves that were taken, all right? When you take a look at this, these groups of people, they group together and they form societies of their own in their new countries or where they are, established. They create cultural groups, they maintain elements of their homeland, religion, and they also absorb new ideas from influence in their new locations. And then, of course, many of them face racial and ethnic prejudice because for some reason, we just cannot get around that, which is, which is crazy. All right. Migrant workers in the time period, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Indians are mostly males. All right. It's mostly males. This would bring about a shift in demographics in their home nation. All right. Gender roles that were traditionally filled by males would now start to be filled by females. Women begin to gain autonomy and authority as they took on these roles that were previously had been filled by males. If the females followed their husbands, and some did, they often participated more fully, but they're still far from equal, okay? It is still a very patriarchal society from where they came from and where they went to. And some of these male migrants, if they went alone, they would send money home to the family. It reduced the need for the woman in the home country, the wife in the home country, to work outside of the home if they were constantly getting, income from their husband who was working in the plantation fields in Southeast Asia, in the South Pacific, or wherever. And it allowed them to gain more responsibility. And it allowed for girls to attend school longer because they did not have to go and work as well. Other effects is enclaves, all right? Ethnic enclaves. If you took Human Geo last year, you should be all over something about ethnic enclaves. These are basically clusters or neighborhoods of people from the same foreign country formed in many major cities, all right? If you go to Washington, D.C., if you go to San Francisco, you'll go to Chinatown. I highly encourage you to go to Chinatown. That is an ethnic enclave. But they're not only in, the United States. They're all over the world. You have Chinese enclaves in Southeast Asia, and they became very, very important in the opium trade. They were business owners. They were merchants. Some gained great wealth as money lenders. And by the end of the 19th century in Southeast Asia, the Chinese controlled a lot of trade through Southeast Asia. In the Americas, large numbers during the California gold rush and building the railroads worked on farms or the garment industry in San Francisco. And they formed their own enclaves there. Chinese laborers went to Cuba and Peru. They were on 8-year contracts. So when large amounts of people of the same ethnic identity, the same culture, go as a group, they're going to form their own home-like enclave in the new area that they're living. All right, so you can kind of take a look at this map of Toronto in Canada. I mean, where the colors are, you know, in certain areas, it's where large groups of one ethnicity live, okay? You tend to live with the people that are very similar to you. It's just a human nature thing. It's not a racist thing. It's just a human nature thing. You want to be with people that are like you. You know, Indians began to establish their own enclaves. You know, after slavery was abolished by the British in 1833, they had to replace the slaves with Indian indentured servants. They went to Africa to work on the colonies, sugar plantations. Many stayed in these areas in South Africa. But as they stayed in these areas, of course, they experienced a lot of discrimination. And one of the people that began to speak out against this discrimination was a young Indian named Mohandas Gandhi. Yes, it is the same Gandhi, the bald-headed guy that we are more familiar with in the 20th century. He founded what is called the Natal, N-A-T-A-L, or Natal, Indian Congress in South Africa, and he worked to expose this discrimination, you know, worldwide. He then returns to India in 1914 and becomes a huge spokesman in the Indian nationalist movement there. And then, of course, we don't have to worry too much about knowing a whole lot of Gandhi, just because, you know, it is a 20th century phenomenon, and we're not being tested over the 20th century. But you could bring him up if you're talking about the discrimination of people and the idea that Gandhi, along with Martin Luther King Jr., practiced, you know, civil disobedience peacefully. All right, that's where Martin Luther King gets his ideas from. He gets it from, you know, Gandhi here. So, what are some of the effects on the receiving societies here? You get Irish enclaves in North America after the American Revolution. Many Irish settled in northern cities. They helped construct the canal system in the United States. And like I said before, eventually 3 million would leave Ireland due to the Great Potato Famine. You know, over half of those that left, you know, Ireland come to the United States. There is a large Irish population in the area of Iowa in which I live. I'm from this area about right in here. All right, that's where I am from. And as you can see, there is a large Irish population that lives there. Very strong Catholic ideas there. And this Irish immigration remained very, very strong into the 19th century. And when they would come over, many of these new immigrants were single women as well. And they were looking for work and looking for husbands. They needed somebody to take care of them. And women became domestic servants. They worked in the homes, and men worked as unskilled labor on railroads or on farms. All right. So, due to this new migration, other effects are prejudice. And we need to start, or they felt that we needed to start regulating the amount of immigrants coming into the United States. You know, which is very, very funny because the United States is a country of immigrants. You know, the majority of us are not native to this area of the world. My family itself comes from, you know, northern Germany. And, you know, as I'm talking, you know, and I'm seeing some of this stuff, you know, here, you know, some of you are from Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia. So, but your parents consider themselves American citizens, but they are not from here. They're not indigenous. That's what the United States is about. But we also have a problem with, you know, discriminating against people that don't look like us. And unfortunately, the majority of people that live in the United States are of European background. And at this time, they felt the need to discriminate or regulate those that were not like them, those that did not look like Europeans, okay? So you become targets of discrimination because they were said to take work away from Americans, okay? So by 1882, the United States banned further Chinese immigration with the Chinese Exclusion Act. And guys, this was not repealed until 1943. So we're less than 100 years from when the Chinese were still banned from coming into the United States. All right. And it's not only happened in the United States, it happened in Australia as well. You have what is called the White Australia policy here. Due to the gold rush of the mid-19th century, a lot of Chinese and Japanese began to emigrate looking for work in the mines of Australia. So in response, the British province of Victoria in Australia passed the Chinese Immigration Act in 1855, limiting the number of Chinese that could come into the country. And again, like I said before, you start to see Chinese enclaves begin to be formed here. But by the late 19th century, you begin to see a big push by anti-Chinese leagues in Australia begin to develop. And by 1901, the Australian government took action to limit non-British immigration. All right, basically saying, hey, if you're not British, you're not coming in. So that's going to exclude a large portion of immigrants. And basically what it was to preserve a white Australia. As you see, vote no and keep Australia white. All right, and the White Australia policy remained in effect until the 1970s. Okay, so we have that prejudice going on into the 1970s, and probably some of it still exists, and it's a sad commentary on our society. All right, so that brings us to the end of the content that is going to be tested over on the exam. All right, so next week we're going to be dealing with writing on all my afternoon sessions. They're all going to be Zoom sessions. There's not going to be a single one that is going to be based on a YouTube Live, okay? Now, I said I was going to do something a little bit different on Monday for our writing, and I am not going to give you the prompts until we all check in to the Zoom session. I will not send you the documents until after that point. So you will not see the documents beforehand. And I know some of you probably already looked at the documents, and I'm fine with that up until this point. But next week when we practice, we are going to practice it like it is a real DBQ, a real test, okay? So once everyone starts checking into the Zoom on Monday, I will send out the documents at that time. I will instruct, maybe Mr. Peterson will pop in at that time, and he will send out the DBQ documents to his students as well at that time. We'll send them out in a Word document. We'll also send them out in a PDF as well, because I want to give you that feeling of what it's going to be like on that Thursday when we take the test. All right. Yeah, we have reviewed everything, Lily. We are done. Lily, if I know you're from Haltom, if you want to be a part of the Zoom on Monday, just send me an email and I will email you the link on Monday, and then we will go from there. All right. So anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. I was glad that as many of you popped in as you did. I appreciate the hard work that you have been putting in over the last, I don't know how many weeks it's been since we've all been together. It's hard to believe that we're here at the end of the year. And, just wanted to let you know that I miss you. I wish we were all together. And it's really, really sad that we're not going to be together on the day of the exam. But you know what? We got a lot of things to cover. And if you stay focused, you stay determined, you don't give up, good things will happen. And you will come out of this exam with a passing grade. But we cannot give up now. Okay, that's the worst thing you can do is say, we've got this. I don't need any more practice. We always need practice. All right, guys. Well, I'm out of here. You guys take care. Have a great weekend. Love you and miss you.